Claire Daly and Deputy Joan Collins were sharing time. Deputy Claire Daly.
Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. I think in some ways we've discussed this issue so much over the past number of weeks. I think the Minister and the Government are trying to present it as a positive, that we're having 20 hours of discussion on this topic over the next number of weeks. But the reality, of course, is that what we've had is really 20 years of waiting for successive governments to legislate for what is and what has been for decades a woman's legal and constitutional right to an abortion in Ireland where her life is in danger, including from a risk of suicide. And, you know, other deputies have said that it is an absolute scandal that this has been ignored for so long, which of course it is. But in many ways, I see our discussion over the next number of weeks as a further delaying tactic, because everybody knows, every opinion poll, every survey, the outpouring of emotion and discussion in this country over the past number of weeks, that people in Ireland, as they have done repeatedly over the decades in successive referenda, support the provision of lawful abortion where a woman's life is in danger. And really all that the Government are doing in this discussion is saying that you let us know what you're going to do about it before Christmas, not that you're actually going to do anything, but you'll tell us what you will do. And that just isn't good enough, because it isn't rocket science. It is pretty straightforward. These are the findings of the 4th expert group, and surprise, surprise, they actually haven't been dramatically different than any other of the findings of the many other expert groups, because the reality is quite straightforward. And, you know, if you compare the actions of your government minister with the reaction of the British government to the Levingston inquiry, it tells an interesting tale to my mind, because here you had the British government launching an investigation into cultural practices and the ethics of the press. They present a 2,000-page report, which is published immediately, and the government make a statement on that within hours. Here we have an expert group set up, 58 pages with a few pictures and graphs thrown in for good measure, so not even 58 pages. Months later to come out than when it should have come out, weeks to release it, then the newspapers get it ahead of the chamber here, and we still, weeks later, again, haven't got an official response from the government about what you're going to do on an issue that is decades old. And that really sums up, to my mind, the systematic ignoring of this issue which has gone on over decades. I think what we have here is an expert or an opportunity to blood a few backbenchers, let them get their fears off their chest, appease their constituents, talk to whoever they want to, and then come the new year, you'll whip them into line, because everybody knows there has to be legislation. There's no way out of it in terms of the European courts or any other basis for that. So, you know, I think in that sense it is regrettable that you didn't take the opportunity to support our bill going on to committee stage last week, because it did give the basis to have legislation framed which we collectively as a House could have amended later on to bring in this very basic of basic provisions, which, as the expert group have said, we are talking about primarily medical decisions which have been caught up and slowed down in a legal quagmire. And let's be honest about it. Why is that the case? Because of the traditional interference of the Catholic Church in the runnings of state matters here in Ireland. That's why we're in this mess. We have the original 1983 referendum and that very unwelcome amendment there. That's the nub of this. These issues should never have been in the Constitution in the first place. These are private matters between women and their doctors, and really there should be no basis for interference here. Many other jurisdictions manage to deal with this simple medical practice by guidelines and medical procedures, as indeed they do for many other medical practices as well. There is no need to get bogged down in a difficulty. The reason why we're in it is because of our constitutional situation, and as a result of that, what we've actually succeeded in doing is treating women, as the Minister for Justice said last week, as second-class citizens with lesser rights to equality and whose health has been jeopardised. And we do want to make it clear at the start of this that if you don't come forward with legislation early in the new year, that we will be most definitely retabling our bill, again amended next time round, and I would like to see your backbench colleagues on the Labour Party try and weasel out of this one if there isn't a provision for legislation in it, because of course basic primary legislation can then be added onto by certain powers to yourself, Minister, in terms of certain areas of it, or indeed medical guidelines, and there's no doubt in my mind that that is the only way in which we can go forward. But, you know, the dogs on the streets are asking the question, how far are we going forward? And is that really amounting to progress after all these times? How could it be posed as a fundamental breakthrough that women have the right to have their lives protected? I mean, the fact that we're even debating it, to be honest, is quite insulting. Because obviously what the tragic circumstances of the death of Savita Halappanavar have put on the agenda is the whole circumstances that many women who find themselves pregnant in this country come up with, the difficulties of all of the reasons why people have to choose abortion. And, you know, that has opened up the debate beyond this. I think it's been very interesting, some of the background debate, some of the mixing up of canon law in this. The idea that the Church on the one hand say, well, absolutely, they fully appreciate that a woman's life has to be protected, but in the instance where there is a termination there, well, it's not really an abortion, and dressing it up in that way that they don't have a problem. Of course, stories highlighted last week in Arizona in America, where a Catholic bishop excommunicated the head nun in a hospital and decommissioned that hospital as a Catholic hospital because they did terminate a pregnancy for life-saving reasons, gives, I suppose, exposes that lie. And I think we have to say, when you consider all of the stories that all of us have heard over the last number of weeks, the people who've gone on the airwaves, the women who've suffered the trauma of carrying fetuses with fatal abnormalities that they know at any minute could die, who are driven out of these countries with massive amounts of money to go and sort of march around the streets of Liverpool or Birmingham to have a termination. One woman saying that the ashes of her fetus, when they were incinerated, were sent back to her in a DHL package because they couldn't deal with that situation. Over there, she couldn't acknowledge where she had been, and the shame and the trauma added to that. An indefensible cruelty, Minister Shatter told us last week, and I agree with him. What I don't agree with is that he shook his shoulders and said, well, I'm sorry about that, but there's nothing we as a government can do. There are many reasons. Apart from that, rape, incest, women who are too young, women who are too old, women who, for all sorts of reasons, have to make a decision to have an abortion. And we have Irish abortions. They just don't happen here. Well over 150,000 Irish women, thousands every year. The people who've ended up contacting us, who've been out on the streets, who've spoken in the opinion polls, say this hypocrisy must be addressed.
2 minutes,
it has really touched a nerve with people. I was contacted by a man down the country during the week who said that the Savita case really opened up old wounds for him and his family. And I've been contacted by a lot of people. But this man told me that his mother died in similar circumstances in 1961 in the Coombe Hospital, where she bled to death on the pregnancy of her 7th child. And he was 6 years of age at the time. He had sisters and brothers ranging in age from 12 to 3. As a result of that and his mother's death, and obviously the fetus died as well, his 4 sisters and himself and his brother were taken into the industrial schools because his father couldn't cope. Himself and his brother ended up in Artane. His sisters went to Golden Bridge. They spent 5 years and 10 years in those institutions until their father could get them back and try and put the family together. When they got back to the house, they had no clothes, no change of clothes, no beds. They were wearing Wellingtons. Nobody ever checked up on them afterwards. This is the legacy of how this state has not supported families, not supported women, and all that man wanted was that one day his story might be put on the Dáil record, and I would like to do that now, because I think it's unacceptable that we continue to ignore the tragedy and the trauma that goes on in life. All that any civilised society can do is to try and support its citizens in their decision-making, in the difficult choices that they have to make, and that includes the right to have children, to have them safely and to bring them up in dignity without fear of poverty, stigma and so on. And we've a lot to learn. We have, in some ways, come a long way. In other ways, we're stuck back in those years that man and his family have had to endure.